It was a cold, rainy night in the city. The kind of night where even the streetlights seemed to shiver, and the wind felt like it could cut through your coat. Inside his warm, tidy apartment, Mark was just finishing dinner when there was a soft knock on his door. He opened it to find a man standing there, drenched from the rain, holding out a hand and a trembling cup. "Please, anything helps," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark hesitated. He looked at the man's soaked clothes, the worn shoes, the tired eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of struggle. For a moment, he felt a pang of sympathy. But then he shook his head and stepped back. I can't help," he muttered, and closed the door, and with that simple act, he thought the moment was over. Little did he know that one night, one choice would change everything he thought he knew about life, about people, and about kindness. Before we dive into this story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We post inspiring, heartwarming stories every week here at Kindness Story Hub, and we'd love for you to be part of our community. Mark had always considered himself a practical man. He worked hard, earned well, and had built a life he was proud of. He had a beautiful apartment, a steady job, and weekends spent with friends or watching sports. Life, by all appearances, was good, but Mark also had a rule he lived by: he never gave money to strangers on the street. He told himself it was for his own safety, or that it wouldn't make a real difference. "There are charities for that," he would say, justifying his indifference. That night, the rain hammered down, and he felt safe inside, away from the chaos outside. He had made the right choice, or so he thought. Hours later, Mark was getting ready for bed when a loud knock shook his door. Startled, he hesitated. No one knocks at this hour, he thought. Slowly, he opened the door again. Standing there was the same man, soaked to the bone, but this time his eyes were not pleading, they were burning with urgency. "I'm sorry to bother you again," the man said, voice shaking with desperation. "Please. I have nowhere else to go tonight." Mark felt a flicker of guilt. He wanted to look away, to close the door again, to return to his warm apartment. But something made him pause. There was a raw, human need in that man's eyes, a need that could not be ignored. Yet he stepped aside, letting the man in. He handed him a towel, offered him some dry clothes he had from an old gym bag, and made him a cup of hot tea. The man's hands shook as he held it, and Mark noticed the deep, grateful smile that spread across his face. "My name's James," the man said softly. I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Mark replied, though inside he felt a warmth he hadn't expected. "Just sit down, get warm." They sat together in the small living room. The rain drummed against the windows as James told his story. He had lost his job months ago, had fallen behind on rent, and one misfortune after another had left him on the streets. But despite his hardship, there was no bitterness in his voice, just a quiet hope that someone might care. Mark listened, feeling a mix of sorrow and admiration. Here was a man who had faced incredible adversity, yet still managed to stand with dignity. And for the first time, Mark realized that his own fears and excuses had seemed trivial in comparison. Over the next few days, Mark found himself thinking about James. He offered him a spare room until he could get back on his feet, helped him find a temporary job at a nearby cafe, and even introduced him to some friends who could offer guidance. Every small gesture seemed to lift a little weight off James' shoulders, and Mark began to notice something changing in himself too. It wasn't just satisfaction or the fleeting good feeling of doing something nice, it was deeper than that. Mark felt connected. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. His life, which had seemed complete, suddenly felt richer, fuller, infused with meaning. And all of it had started because he had chosen to let someone in, literally and figuratively, rather than closing the door on them. Weeks passed, and James gradually regained stability. he moved into a small apartment nearby and started saving money again. Mark and James had become close friends, sharing dinners, laughter, and long conversations about life, dreams, and the small joys that so often go unnoticed. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset paint the city in hues of orange and pink, James turned to Mark and said, "You know, that first night you let me in? That changed my life. But I think it changed yours too." Mark smiled, thinking back to the moment he had first hesitated, almost turned him away, almost stayed in his comfort zone. "You're right," he admitted. "I didn't realize how much I needed that as much as you did." From that day on, Mark made a silent promise to himself: never again would he turn away someone in need. Not because he wanted recognition, not because he thought it would impress anyone, but because he had felt firsthand how a single act of kindness can ripple through lives in ways you cannot predict. He started small, helping neighbors carry groceries, volunteering at local shelters, and even just offering a smile or a warm word to strangers. Each act, no matter how minor, seemed to lift not only those he helped but himself as well. The story of Mark and James soon spread among friends and co-workers. People began to realize that kindness wasn't a weakness, or a favor, or a burden, it was a bridge between hearts. And in a world that often feels harsh and indifferent, those bridges can make all the difference. Years later, Mark and James started a small foundation to help people facing homelessness in their city. They provided temporary housing, job training, and mentorship for those who had nowhere else to turn. The foundation was modest, but its impact was profound. People who had once felt invisible began to see that they mattered, that their lives had value, that someone cared through it all. Mark often reflected on that rainy night, the first knock on his door, and the choice he had almost avoided. How close he had come to letting fear and convenience dictate his actions. How easy it had been to walk away, to ignore a human being who needed help. And how, by simply opening the door, he had unlocked not just someone else's future but his own. What Mark learned, and what we can all learn, is that kindness is never wasted. It doesn't have to be grand or public or perfect. Sometimes it's a warm cup of tea, a listening ear, or a simple invitation to come in from the cold. And sometimes, it's the very thing that transforms your own life in ways you never imagined. We live in a world where it's easy to feel isolated, to put up walls, and to convince ourselves that our small actions don't matter. But the story of Mark and James reminds us that even one small choice can create a chain reaction of hope, healing, and connection. It proves that behind every door we close or open, there's a potential story waiting to unfold, a life waiting to be touched. So, the next time you see someone in need, pause. Consider opening that door, literally or metaphorically. Offer a smile, a helping hand, or just a moment of your attention. You never know how profoundly that small act could ripple through someone's life, or your own, because in the end, kindness is a gift we give to each other, and the most beautiful part is that it often comes back to us in ways we never expected. Mark thought he was helping a stranger that rainy night. But what he really discovered was how much humanity and joy he had been missing, and how a single act of compassion could change everything. And that's the power of kindness. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with friends, and comment below about a moment when someone's kindness changed your life. And remember, for more inspiring stories that celebrate the beauty of human connection, subscribe to Kindness Story Hub.